Hello, I'm John Storm, and today I'd like to try to produce a video that's not going to get me nailed for copyright violations or anything else, and yet still get a few important points across. It's a time we're in when a lot of people's eyes are opening to a lot of things that we believed for a long time about our government, about our world, about our education, about our religion. Are beginning to show up as not true. It's a false concept. A great deal of it is false. We have an entire paradigm based upon lies. And then on the other hand, we've got an indigo revolution, and it's kind of going a bit off center too. For one, well, they state, and they're correct, it's a very left-brained paradigm that we're in. Everything is off here, mathematics and that, but it completely leaves the right brain, the creative side, unhooked. You're considered the oddball if that's the way you think. Now, everything for a witch, and this is going to be based more on practical witchery than MK Ultra or anything like that. Though in my life these things are kind of connected. It's kind of complicated, but not so much really. But it's kind of hard to explain to you if you don't have the foundation built upon to understand it. Everything is cause and effect, action and reaction. Okay, we have this left brain paradigm, and everybody finds out that, hey, this isn't all of it. We are all walking around like Rush Limbaugh with half our brains tied behind our back. So then we have the indigo revolution that says, well, I'm going to be right brain dominant. And it's, okay, you're not getting the picture. You got two halves. You don't cut off one and just use the one half. Nobody develops a brain that they only use a little small part of. And this is what the Darwinists say. We've developed all this and that, but we only use a small fraction of our actual gray matter between our ears, whereas just about everything else uses the whole brain. If you do an electroencephalogram or an MRI of a chimp or a dolphin, their brain lights up all over the place. It's got all kinds of functions going. Ours, it's a little bit here, a little bit there, around the edges and that. Nothing much going on in other places that they can really detect and that we really use. And if you look around and see all the stupid things that we do and the stupid things, the misperceptions and misconceptions that we have all over the place, you can understand how it happens. It's easy to get by somebody that's not using their whole brain. I mean, if you were stoned out of your mind every day, would you make a very good rocket scientist? Now, it might be nice when you go home and want to kick your feet up, but it's no good when you're in the lab. You got to use both halves. Now, I tend to cut down religion a lot. The Indigo Revolution is not exactly the way to go. Yes, use the right half. I encourage that. Use both halves is what I encourage. Don't block out the one for the other. Like, it's like these idiots that keep voting. Oh, I'm going to vote Democrat. Oh man, he screwed everything up. Now I'm going to vote Republican. Oh man, he screwed everything up. Now we're going to go back and vote Democrat. And you wonder why, you keep voting for the lesser of two evils and keep wondering why is this nation so evil? We keep trying to vote to change things, but you can't. Not that way. It's not two-dimensional. Life is at least 10 dimensions plus. According to physicists, mathematicians, but people's perceptions are not quite the same as that. I keep talking about two-dimensional thinking. Well, you're either gay or you're straight, you're Democrat or you're Republican, you're liberal or you're conservative. Everybody's got this label. You're one thing or the other, and then anything in between those 2 points is shades of gray. And that's completely ignoring colors like red, blue, green, yellow, violet, and ultraviolet, and then colors that you can't even see like gamma, delta, X-ray, so on and so forth. Is this thing working? Okay, it is. I'd like to speak a bit on Dimensionality and perceptions. Now, I have it doesn't exactly coincide with physics. I want to talk, everybody thinks, well, religion says you got a soul that you got to be worried about, and it's a bit off kilter too, kind of like the indigos, one thing or the other. We're still getting two-dimensional here, and we got to get out of that. If you want to see reality, it's got to go far beyond that. Now, I'd like you to take in your mind and picture a pentagram and think of, okay, this is kind of, everybody thinks of it as a witch's symbol. Well, in my family, a triskele was more the thing that we preferred than a pentagram. We're Denayan. We're not based on Judeo-Christian or Luciferian or anything like that. It's completely something different. But a pentagram is really good for our example. You know, a lot of people use the triskele as a good picture of body, soul, and spirit, and how they are all combined to make up one entity. And but they keep thinking of the different parts as something separate and not the whole. See, you don't have a soul. You are a soul. That is your awareness. That is your consciousness. Somewhere inside you, you're all aware of who you are. Now, there are certain stages that we go through as we're growing up. The problem is a lot of people never grow out of them, and they're not encouraged to grow out of them. People, the mob, the group think, you know, public education, religion tries to keep you all, well, we're all this people, we're all this stereotype, and if we're anything other than that, well, we don't fit in and we get ostracized and we're encouraged or discouraged from being individualistic. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the dimensionality of perception as it relates to our souls, to our, when I talk about souls, I'm not talking about some ghostly thing, though we will be discussing those. I got some pictures of orbs and stuff that I'd like to show and share with you, and get a few things across. I'll tie this all in together, you know, about dimensionality and perception. It goes just a little bit differently than it does in physics, but it coincides very closely. The first order of perception is the one-dimensional soul. It is represented by a single point of light, or a dot on a piece of paper. It has no length, width, or depth of character, but a single, self-aware point of consciousness. I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum, as they say. They are only able to perceive themselves as the only sentient or important being in their entire cosmos. This is the princess in the joke who holds the light bulb in the socket and the world revolves around her to screw it in. These are the people who exist only for their own creature comforts, who believe the sum total of their lives is he who finishes with the most toys wins the game. They are the gods of their own little pocket universe. They can perceive nobody else for who they are, but only who they are themselves. Anything outside of their single perceived dimension of being cannot be seen, understood, or believed in. Hence, it never registers as reality for them. Indeed, our physicists will insist that there are at least 9 or 10 more relevant dimensions making up the sum total of reality around these people, but they only perceive the one. The next order of perception are the two-dimensional souls. They have some semblance of length and width in their perception of their reality, but not much of what you can call any depth. They are as caricatures drawn on a flat piece of paper. Anything looking like depth in their souls is an illusion of perspective and shading. Everything for them is either one thing or the other. You're either Democrat or Republican, liberal or conservative, gay or straight, male or female, right or wrong, left or right, black or white, and anything between those 2 points are but shades of gray to them. If it does not exist on that flat plane, of the paper that their souls are drawn on, it does not exist for them. They cannot perceive it. You and I only exist in as much as they may be able to perceive us in one or the other of those labels and definitions. They may perceive us as the guy or the babe, but never grasp that we are anything really more than that. If it cannot be narrowed down to one of those two-dimensional categories, and anything outside of those is considered to be an aberration or an anomaly. It just ain't right. And it's a mysterious realm outside of their perceptions, the realms of angels and demons, and nothing else sane to their thinking. But we understand that many more dimensions than merely those two apply. Because they don't see them doesn't render them of no account. It just means they are blind to them. They are extremely limited to what they are capable of attaining as evolving human souls. A mathematician might note to you that any kind of triangle that we were to draw in this person's two-dimensional plane, the sum total of its angles being taken would add up to 180 degrees, and never more than that. I'll show you how that expands and changes with more dimensions, with the more dimensions that we factor into our equation. Like Merlin once surmised, they're prisoners trapped behind walls of air. The next order of perception is the most commonly trapped souls in this world. They believe that they live in a 3D world. It has length, width, and height or depth to it. Now we can take a sphere, as in a globe of the earth. From the equator, we can draw a line at 90 degrees straight up to the North Pole, and then draw another line at 90 degrees from that back down to the equator, and have a triangle whose sum total of angles adds up to 270 degrees, instead of that meager 180 that our two-dimensional friend had. We enjoy a greater degree of possibilities in this three-dimensional realm, but it is still woefully incomplete and limited and prone to a lot of bad luck and errors. It is stagnant in time, and it doesn't move. People and things never remain where you left them. Why isn't this person the same? Joe, you've changed. Mary, you've changed. What's different? You're not the same person you were. It's like, yes, you are, but you've evolved. But time doesn't exist for them. They're only three-dimensionals. Time is a fourth. They don't understand that people and things grow and change, and this upsets their worldview. It seems like a more realistic version of reality, but rarely ever pans out that way for them. Remember, there's really 10 or 11 dimensions present and affecting our environment around us, and these people only have a handle on 3. Eventually, many of these souls will graduate to 4 dimensions of perception. They begin to get a handle on that fourth aspect of space-time that we measure in miles per hour, feet per second, and even light years. The universe around them is in motion, and they understand that to make connections with this person, they must arrive at this length and longitude, this width and latitude, and this height, we're up on the 3rd floor, and be there at this time by 2 o'clock to meet them. They can feel the flow, and they can shoot skeet and get all of their ducks in a row, as they say, which allows them to operate a lot better than most people in this world plane of existence. You can see that they are considerably healthier of mind, body, and spirit than our previous examples. They have a much greater freedom of movement and liberty than the others, too. Remember, every time we add a dimension, add another factor of dimension to anything, we have a greater degree of freedom of movement. But for many of the same reasons, they are as trapped in their awareness and abilities to grow as human souls into the kind of consciousness that we were meant and endowed by our Creator to fulfill. Can you begin to see that all of these are trapped here and held prisoners. I have made mention before the God of this world. You might even find it in scriptures if you really read that thing rather than let somebody just thump it at you. And the God of this world is none other than Lucifer, and he has his followers who are little self-styled little g, is the God of this world. I'm not talking about the Creator. I'm talking about something smaller. Remember, I'm a pagan. I may talk a lot like a Christian. I believe in Christ, but that doesn't make me a Christian. I'm not churchy. I don't belong to that. I don't recite the Nicene Creed and go like that. What I believe is what I believe. It's not just one thing or another, and I have to fall into this label or I don't exist. I am my own person, and this is what I'm trying to encourage of you yourselves. Okay, so we got this God of this world, little g. There's lots of gods, all kinds of them, gods and goddesses galore. That doesn't make them the Creator. There's only one Creator. And we got to get into a lot of that, but let's just take the things that we can deal with piecemeal here. All right, so we have these followers of Lucifer that are self-styled little g gods themselves. They hold power to keep people enthralled to themselves in this world plane of existence. And they demand and get respect and worship from these trapped souls because they cannot perceive to reach for anything better than what these little gods offer them here. They all have workaday jobs, paying their taxes, and making gods and other celebrities or significant entities richer in this material plane's goods, increasing their power and range of ruling over more and more such trapped souls. Your choices here are to get educated, or rather indoctrinated, into something useful for them. You get a good job that pays well, to keep you in those things that make you comfortable here. And you buy those things from them, and they get the money and the profit from them, which makes them richer. And then you pay taxes to them. You find the right man or woman and get married, buy a house and a car or two, and pay more taxes to them for owning those. Settle down and raise a family, or more significantly, breed them more hard-working little taxpayers to keep all of these petty gods perched high upon their thrones. While each of you loses sleep on odd nights wondering if this is all that life is supposed to be, for reasons beyond your abilities to see or perceive, you suffer breaks with this reality in psychotic episodes or depression. And then you pay more petty gods for pills to cover all that up and allow you to get back to work in your little cubicles. Quantum physicists and string theorists are jumping up and down and tearing at their hair in frustration. You haven't seen or perceived the half of what there is to perceive and reach for. Dreadful, isn't it? I did say that our pinnacle illustration would be our picture of a healthy, wise, and aware witch or individual. But where is that fifth dimension seen and perceived by anyone? It gets tapped into in the right hemispheres of the brains of the most creative people and people who dream when they sleep. All the religious, political, and educational systems devised by those petty gods of this present world are designed specifically to keep souls left-brained, to the exclusion of all else. If your guidance counselor even begins to see a creative or artistic right brain streak in you, they'll suggest that you keep that as a hobby and start taking courses that can get you a decent living wage than risk becoming yet another starving artist. I bet a good amount of money that many of you listening to this has heard something like that before and were discouraged from taking that other road in your life. If you persist, your class peers treat you badly for being the oddball, the person that nobody seems to get. It gets treated as a bad or an unwanted thing. But we've already noted our dimensionally challenged people never perceive or get anything beyond the limited scope of what they can see or understand. And that doesn't make them all-knowing about reality as it really is. It makes them blind, deaf, and dumb, and only useful as machine operators for petty gods, with no real future or wings to fly with. Can we ever fly? Some will never know, because they will never look to see how it might be done. But some of us will transcend space and time and dream and perceive things that can never be seen or handled in a 4D world plane. Our minds and souls exist in 5D. In a 3 and 4D world plane, the shortest distance between any 2 points is a straight line. But in 5D, remember I was pointing out that every time we add another dimension, we add a greater freedom of movement. In 5D, the shortest distance isn't a straight line. It's a fold in space. In the 4D realm, time is linear and moves one way only. But in a 5D dreamscape, we can travel in any direction in time, forward or backwards, and see the future or even the past before our present bodily incarnation. Or incarceration might be more appropriate. Our bodies can be asleep in Rochester, New York, and our souls awaken flying through the streets of Singapore, half a world away, at the speed of a thought. Many times I have explored places that I later visited and had knowledge of those places that no 4D soul could ever begin to understand. It's not magic or insanity, but real information garnered in very real ways. I can see things happening in my stay-at-home recreational dreams that tell me things about myself, that helps me avoid some problems that other lesser D souls will plunge headlong into without a clue. I can make personal course corrections in aspects of my life, excuse me, that better prepare me for obstacles that others can't even see. If it wasn't for all of the God of this world's followers and henchmen, this is how most of us on this planet would be right now. Our world would be happier and healthier, and as a species, we'd all be very aware of who and where we are as children of God, the big G, and at a better point to be reaching for the remaining dimensionalities. Remember, I only illustrated a healthy person right now as that pentagram. 5 points, 5 dimensions. This is what you should have to be healthy right now. But this isn't where we stop. We continue on. We move in time. We move forward. The further we get, the more we can see. The further out, it's like looking out onto the ocean and you see the horizon. You don't see anything past there. It is a broad horizon. It is a big sea. It is a big lake, whatever it is. But the further out you get, the more you see. It's kind of like laying on your back and looking up at the stars at night. I used to love camping up in the Rocky Mountains, and I'd lay there under the stars, and the longer I'd look, the more stars I'd see. But you got to get there first. You don't see them all just from your first glance up. You got to be there. You got to be immersed in it. And you got to be moving. Even if you're, Will Rogers once said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you stand still. So we should be reaching for the remaining dimensionalities, adding more points to our healthy pinnacle, and enjoying an even greater degree of freedom of movement and how to fly. I'm aware of how crazy all of this might sound, especially to someone who's been limited by their perceptions by a lifetime of bad teaching. I had different teachers. But I can still point you to some evidence that the human race hasn't always been as limited as it is now. Once upon a time, other gods walked this earth and taught men the deep things about reality. You take it as magic now. That's a catch-all term. Once upon a time, men built structures that could last thousands of years through earthquakes, floods, and hurricanes. Men do not build such structures anymore, but they seem to believe that they are wiser and more sophisticated than their own ancestors could ever be. Look at these huge stones of Stonehenge, or Machu Picchu, or the pyramids of Egypt and Baalbek, or the seafloor near Japan, the pyramids in Bosnia, China, Turkey, and many other cities and temples on mountaintops and in jungles made of stones that we'd find nearly impossible to move today with the mightiest of our machines. Much more so to quarry such stones from hundreds of miles away, to move them up onto mountaintops and place them all together, so well fitted, without mortar, some weighing hundreds of tons. I point this out that somebody obviously knew and perceived of things that you cannot know to make all of these things possible, and with less mechanical technology using fossil fuels than we are hopelessly addicted to now. That's not just crazy opinion. That is demonstrable reality beyond what anyone is presently perceiving. And since we had it all before these petty gods took control of things, we can be sure that they are within our reach if we look past these walking, talking roadblocks and claim our own freedom of thought and growth as children of God, and not the pawns of these lesser, rebellious, selfish, little petty gods. We were destined all along to become much greater than those little tyrants could ever imagine being. I have done my utmost to show you that this is so. Please note that I did not charge you for the knowledge or string you along with a half-assed idea to sell you the rest for $59.95 for the complete lesson showing you how. I have a motive or an agenda, but money and worldly wealth is not in it. I tell you because I wholeheartedly believe it to be true. Now, I positively want to get all this information about dimensionality and perception clear in your mind. You know, I'm not going to take for granted the false concepts that have been built up through religion and even education, which is actually more indoctrination than education. I guarantee you the people at the top of the food chain on this planet don't learn the same stuff you do. I didn't either. So we're going to have to break this up into two parts, and maybe I'll join them together later or something. But before we get on to that, let's talk about the big G. Now, in the course of things, scientists are spending billions of dollars at places like the CERN Collider and to take and slam atomic particles together at nearly the speed, at light speed, to get them to fracture. They're looking for the God particle. All right, they're splitting atoms and splitting particles, and what they're looking for, this God particle, is like the smallest particle that you can possibly find. This is what all the other particles are supposed to be made of. This is the substance of the universe. See, their idea of the universe is that the universe is comprised of matter, but an atom is 99.99999% empty space, or apparently empty space, since you can't fit air in there because air molecules are far bigger than the atoms. Okay, so this is where we get to talk about God. You're not going to find him in the particles. He is in the space between. He is the consciousness. All of this that we see when they say that reality is albeit a persistent illusion, as Einstein has been quoted as saying, is that it's a hologram. You think it's solid. It's not. It's every atom is mostly empty space, as you can see from the example that I show here, which makes you wonder, well, if everything in the universe or multiverse is comprised of atoms, then why doesn't things just kind of pass through each other like ghosts? We got all this empty space to pass through. It's like it really is like passing, you know, how can comets and rocket ships pass between Earth and the Moon, you know, or Earth and Mars, you know, but the space is so grand, even on the grander scale. The solar system is much like a much greater model of the atomic system. So this consciousness permeates everything. You have electrons, protons, neutrons. You have like charges, opposite charges. You know, like charges repel, opposite charges attract. Why don't these things either blow apart or collapse in on each other? Well, that's because God, the Creator, that makes him, you know, the scriptures and everything did say he's incredibly vast. He's like nearly impossible to comprehend for the human imagination. And being taught what you're taught as religion, it's no wonder you'll never grasp it if you keep thinking of stained glass icons and stuff like that. So now when you say that we're created in God's image, well, you automatically think, okay, he's got 10 fingers, 10 toes, a nose, eyes, you know, basically the cranky old white man sitting on the throne. And that's not necessarily the way it is. Because see, you too are, you don't have a soul, you have a body. You are a soul. You are the consciousness that permeates all of those cells and molecules. And when your consciousness leaves that in death or astral projection or, you know, soul travel or anything like that, you're no longer, it starts falling apart. It starts breaking down to its component. You know, you are ultimately two parents. Yeah, you think of mom and dad, but think of your father, the father of all spirits, and think of your mother, Mother Danu, the earth. You're comprised, everything that your body is comprised of breaks back down to dirt. The dirt that you handle out in your yard is actually what's left over of billions of bodies over the passage of time. It's not an intangible, it is measurable. You have an electromagnetic field. This gives this off, and it's important that I make this apparent to you right now. I'm going to try to close this off as part one, and then go back into the fairies and the ghosts and the orbs and stuff like that in the next edition here. But these can be measured. You have an electromagnetic field. I love it when they have all these programs now where, you know, you got these paranormal investigators and that. And they're using a lot of equipment now. I remember in the early 90s we discovered that the digital viewfinders and some cameras picked up the orbs, picked up the orb activities. They weren't visible to the naked eye. I had a friend named Bob Bergstrom, and he had sent me a couple VHS tapes that showed these little orbs, and you know, he was a wedding photographer. He'd video weddings and stuff, and he was noticing when he was looking through this one old church he was in was definitely on hallowed ground. And there was activity. These things were doing loop-de-loops. They'd light on people's shoulders. They'd fly circles around the candle flames, and they were doing all kinds of things. And he noticed that. So after that, when we start doing our own paranormal investigations, we start taking digital cameras or cameras with digital viewfinders so we could check out the orb activity. Now, in a lot of these new paranormal investigator shows, Ghost Hunters, Haunted Collector, Ghost Mine, I love that when I get a chance to see it. I don't have a TV or cable here and now, but I've seen the episodes, and I like the way they do it. They put an EM meter, and they can tell when things start spiking. And the truth is, when things spike to a certain point in the electromagnetic field, you feel it. It comes up. It affects you. You don't see it. Remember, we're talking about dimensionality. We're talking about dimensions more. We're going to go from 5 upward for this part of the talk. We talked through 1 through 4 or 1 through 5 pretty good. Now we're going to talk from 5 upward. This is where the consciousness and more besides starts filling up the spectrum. And we start learning things. They're hard to perceive, but it doesn't mean they're impossible. So you can do that with oftentimes equipment or by seeing the things that they directly affect. You can't see air. You can't see the wind, but you can see how it affects the grass and the trees and windmills and stuff like that around you. And that's going to be true of this part. We did this, I remember in the 70s, there was Kirlian photography, and I remember there was a number of black belts and masters in the particular studios that I belonged to back then after I got my master's ranking. And there was a local college had us put our hands on photographic charged Kirlian plates for Kirlian photography, and you could see our fingertips kind of glowed on the plates when they developed them. And they'd say, well, connect your chi, make the lines of energy, because there'd be like halos around our fingers. More so, the more energy that we pumped into our hands, the bigger and brighter the halos were around our fingers. And they'd say, well, okay, your hands are about 5 or 6 inches apart. Make the lines connect to each hand. Now, the masters who were, familiar with moving chi could do that. We, concentrate and push our consciousness towards towards each other, and sure enough, those lines connected. They do things like cut a leaf in half, and they photographed the leaf whole, and then they'd cut it in half, and you'd find there'd be a phantom leaf. People that had amputation have phantom pains. There's a part of their consciousness that extends beyond their body, and sometimes still extends into those missing legs or limbs that they've lost. So consciousness is a part of that dimensionality and a part of our perception. And I need to point that out to you in this one before we get to the next one. And then you'll understand better of what you're seeing. And once you understand it, you'll better understand how to study it and how to learn more. Remember, if we're a healthy evolving human being, we should all be at least 5 points of dimension. We should be like a pentacle. All right, we should be aware of at least 5 dimensions, and once we're comfortable with that, we should start adding more points to our star, up to a 10-pointed star. Now you begin to understand that there's more to a lot of those mystical symbols than even they say. There's levels within levels, and see, what we call the physical plane of existence is but one small part. People tend to think of extra dimensions as being someplace else other than what we hear, and it actually occupies the same space and time that you're in right now. These are but further. Now, when I was discussing the atom and how it's all empty space, and you wonder, well, how could this physical plane work? Well, a lot of mystics have a thing for that. In some particular traditions, they talk about Om, or the sound that created the universe. Now, interestingly enough, these particles by themselves, because of all the empty space in between them, it's like you could pass 2 solar systems between each other. 2 galaxies could pass through each other because of all of the empty space between the stars and the planets. Now, it's possible some might collide with each other, but very, very few actually would. And they would just pass out from each other. But the thing that makes this physical plane feel solid, gives you the illusion of solidity, is vibration. It's sound. For those of you who are Christian, I'm knocking your religion, but I'm not knocking your God. There was a reason why. Now, in the New Testament and the Old Testament talks a lot about Gentiles. Well, as far as the Jews was concerned, they can be as bigoted as anyone else. Everybody's bigoted. That's kind of one thing common about bigots, no matter what race or culture you find them in. Everyone believes that God shortchanged everybody but them. They all believe it. Black people that are bigots believe the same thing. White people that are bigots, of course, believe that. And we get to push that crap off onto more people than, I remember when I was studying for my master's belt, the Chinese, a lot of the Chinese didn't feel that any non-Asian could ever grasp the concepts and dynamics of martial arts as well as an Asian could, or a properly born Asian could. But that's just the bigotry. So as far as they were concerned, you know, you hear the Islamists talk about infidels and the Jews talk about Gentiles. Well, Gentiles anybody but Jew. Meaning back in the first century, they were pagans. They weren't Lutherans, they weren't Catholics, they were pagans. And they understood. They called Jesus the Word. The Logos is what it was written in the Greek New Testament. And it meant something. It meant something they understood that you're not necessarily taught in Sunday school. And John tries to make it clear. John understood. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the same was in the beginning with God, and there was not anything made that wasn't made by Him. Well, you know, if you take God the Father, He's also called the only begotten Son, but yet He tells us that you, I, you know, your sisters, and that we can all be sons and daughters of God. It tends to be patriarchal, and it just says sons. You know, when they talk about mankind, they're talking about women too, because we don't come from other men. We're not holy anyway, but when, you know, picture God the Creator. He's got all this together. Now, you know, physicists say that if you took all the physical particles in the universe and put them all together, it wouldn't be much bigger than a marble. You know, took all the empty spaces out and compressed it together, it wouldn't be much bigger than a marble. Matter is not the big thing of the universe. And see, here on this material plane, this is where these people try to keep you. They try to keep you at the lowest thing. This is the mob mind. It always seeks the lowest possible level. You got a mob of people, they always match the person with the lowest IQ in the room. It's like water seeking itself. It goes to the lowest point. When you have individuals, that's when they strive for higher. That's when you get peaks. That's when you get serious intelligence. So they try to keep things down on the material plane. So you have God the Creator. He creates this, let there be this, let there be that, and it comes into being. These particles arrange themselves, or He arranges those particles, the building blocks of the universe, and He talks about cornerstones and stuff like that, but people aren't getting it. And they're there, but there wouldn't be any substance to them until that mystical word was spoken, you know. Like I say, some traditions, and they're not even Christians, say, Om, and then everything starts vibrating. And once these particles start vibrating, now you've got substance. Now they don't pass through each other. You've got the illusion of substance because you have these waves that keep that from happening. So, you know, we have a thing for Jesus. He's not just a sound, but you can see where He comes directly from God, whereas we also do, but to a lesser extent. This is, you know, I'm not kicking your hierarchy or anything like that. I'm trying to tell you that it's bigger than you've been led to believe. And a lot of it has been led to keep you in this material plane, keep you thinking everything important in this world is the things that you can get right here and now. And that's a small, small part of your eternal existence. You are energy. I've been trying to describe this consciousness, this awareness, your soul as an energy. And when that energy leaves, the body breaks down. You ever seen anybody that you knew in a coffin? The thing that made them what they were and who they were to you isn't there anymore. You see the body, but what made them them isn't there anymore. I need you to understand that before we go on to part 2, because this is where we start describing other interdimensional beings, where we describe demons, fairies, spirits, ghosts of human beings, and orb activity, and we'll get onto that in the next one, but I'm going to close this one off here, and I thank you very much for listening, and be sure to watch for the next one. It won't be too far away. I just got to get a couple pictures, some Kirlian photographs if I can, to demonstrate to you, to kind of show you about those energy fields and what they are and what they mean. I'm going to tell you about a wild hunt. In witchcraft, how some of these things relate. This all relates, but if you're looking at it in mystical and religious eyes, you're going to miss it for what it is. You're going to miss the point of what we're talking about. And when you understand it better, those things become a bit more real. Your ability to see them or understand what's going on is piqued a bit more. See, I'm looking for your education and evolution too, and that's all I'm looking for in these. And I thank you for listening.